Now, as Nigeria marks 61 years of independence from Britain this weekend, there is a spot of good news for the Nigerian economy amid the gloom of insecurity, corruption, unemployment and poverty. Now, you may know that this country's freight and logistics market has witnessed slow growth for many years, decades in fact, mainly due to poor infrastructure, as well as many issues with road congestion and delays at customs. However, the booming e-commerce sector, particularly in the last 18 months, is helping to boost the Nigerian logistics market. Revenue in e-commerce is expected to grow by more than 11% each year between 2021 and 2025. And areas such as the delivery service, which go hand in hand with e-commerce, are benefiting tremendously from this growth. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line by the Managing Director of Cowrie Asset Management, Johnson Chukwu. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I hope that's how you pronounce your company's name. Is it Cowrie then?
Yes, it's Cowrie. Thank you, Chad, for having me.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, this is rather exciting news, I have to say. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, first of all, what is e-commerce? I mean, it's basically shopping online, is it?
Yes, e-commerce is basically the exchange of goods and services using electronic platforms. Particularly electronic that relies on electronic payment platforms. So basically, a trade or execution of a trade is done between two parties, either peer-to-peer, that is person-to-person or person-to-company, or what you call P2P, where the underlying process is underpinned by electronic platforms. So it doesn't involve physical exchange of cash, but there is actually physical exchange of goods and services, where payment is actually executed through electronic platforms.
Right. Well, thanks for that explanation for those of us who may not be entirely across what e-commerce is. So tell us more about this boom in e-commerce in Nigeria and who's benefiting from it.
Thank you for having me. The boom we are witnessing in e-commerce in Nigeria is benefiting virtually everybody. And when I say virtually everybody, the merchant, that is a trader, is getting his goods or her goods traded or bought by people who are completely outside his or her physical reach. E-commerce enables exchange of goods and services by people who are in different and diverse geographical locations. Beyond that, it also fast-tracks the process of exchange of goods and services. And then it does not entail physical movement of cash. Cash movement is done virtually. So it eliminates the risk of robbery because there's no major cash movement as to attract robbers. And beyond that, it's one sector that is boosting employment in the country. You did mention the issue of logistics. The ancillary to e-commerce is that it has actually led to a fast growth in logistic facilities in the country. And why do we talk of logistics? Because basically what happens is that people trade between locations or geographical areas, and it's a logistic business or logistic company that will move those goods from one point to the other. And what has happened is that because of advancement in technology, particularly telecommunication technology, and the availability of smartphones, a lot of Nigerians, not just young Nigerians, have access to making payments using electronic methods. Either you use your online payment systems, and even now that we're moving towards adoption of e-naira and e-wallets, people who don't even have access to banks or banking services can also execute e-commerce transactions, because once they have their wallet, they can make payment to any supplier of goods. And what we have now is that the logistics company will be the one to take the goods from the trader to the consumer or the buyer in case of physical goods, unless they involve services where maybe the services are also related electronically, like educational services are also related electronically. But if it involves purchase of goods, then the goods have to be moved by the logistic companies. Again, one thing that's worth mentioning is that COVID-19 really helped a lot in people adopting e-commerce payments or electronic payment platforms, as well as boosting the supply of logistic services. What happened was, as a result of the lockdown, where people had to stay at home, people still needed their basic necessities, and they had to place orders for those basic necessities. Then the suppliers had to rely on logistics company to deliver those goods to the point of consumption or the location of the consumers. So we've seen an exponential growth in logistics services as a result of the lockdown and higher adoption of e-payment platforms.
That's a crucial point you made, the fact that COVID-19 helped so much to boost the e-commerce sector, because from what I've read, just by the year 2020, last year, Nigeria became the 35th largest market for e-commerce with a revenue of $5 billion in 2020, placing it ahead of the Czech Republic and behind Israel. And as you said, new markets emerging all the time here.
Yes, basically what happened was we had a push that was now compared by necessity as a result of the lockdown. And the good thing we have to recognize, Nigeria is a huge, huge market. If you look at the demography of Nigeria, the 206 million or so Nigerians, more than 40% of those Nigerians are between the age of 14 and the ages of 35. So, and these are people who are the early adopters of technology. Good thing also, we have seen a very wide expansion in telecommunication service in the country. We have broadband internet services almost all over the major cities of the country. Beyond that, you have 3G and 4G services in several locations in the country. And that means that the speed of transmission of data is also faster. So that has encouraged a lot of young Nigerians to embrace e-commerce. I did mention that you also have to deal with some of our own existing structural bottlenecks that makes it difficult for people to move from one location to the other. Take, for instance, in a place in Lagos, where there is huge vehicular traffic. People find it difficult to move from one part of the state to the other. So they have to rely in a lot of instances on e-commerce or logistic businesses to deliver the goods which they have executed trade through the e-commerce platforms. And that saves them the pressure of being in traffic for donkey hours to get goods they supply. If you stay in Lagos and you see the speed at which Lagosians have adopted e-commerce as a medium of trade, executing trade transactions, you'll be surprised. Today, people stay in their offices and order for food. And because the e-commerce companies or the traders or merchants in Lagos have also, in Nigeria, have also accepted payments on delivery, which eliminates the issue of trust. Because once a merchant accepts, when the goods get to you, you pay me. So the buyer who is buying the goods is no longer worried that upon placing the order and getting the goods, he might not get exactly what he wanted. So that has eliminated the issue of trust and has encouraged a lot of people to adopt e-commerce as a medium of executing their trade transactions. That, like I said, eliminates the problems of having to do with traffic congestion, traffic problems, and that also applies in a lot of places. I said it has narrowed the geographical gap between people and has actually condensed all of us into a single community. Because you can place order for goods from America, from China, or anywhere. You don't need to go there. All you just need is have the platform to make your payment.
I mean, obviously, you understand that market very well, and you've explained it very well indeed. But I mean, I was reading that, you know, the market is growing by 11% every year. Some even estimates are much higher than that. But what are the limitations? Because, I mean, there are a lot of issues in Nigeria that tend to get in the way of things that perhaps limiting that growth to 11% when it should probably be growing at a much higher rate?
Well, some of the limitations are one, FX constraints. The foreign exchange constraints or the lack of convertibility of the naira and local currencies, so that for Nigerians to trade across border, there are a lot of challenges with that, because the amount you can pay electronically from a Nigerian naira bank account is highly limited. So that's one of the constraints, and that's one of the challenges that some of the e-commerce shops in the country have to face when it comes to placing orders from outside the country. The other issue is with respect to criminal activities of criminals who are actually operating in the cyber crime space. So you have to deal with the issue of cyber crime, where people can actually steal your wallet and then use your wallet to place orders, where they can have access to your electronic payment codes and then use it to make orders, mimic you and steal your funds and make orders. And once those orders are delivered, they might be difficult to trace and track those who have stolen from you. So the issue of cybercrime, the issue of access to foreign exchange when it comes to bringing goods from outside the country or trading across border for Nigerians are some of the challenges we have to deal with. I've spoken about the issue of trust, which I said for trade within the Nigerian geographical space, most of the merchants have adopted payment on delivery. So when the goods are get to you, and that has eliminated the concern that some people have of getting what they paid for, that getting less than what they paid for. So, and then the issue of availability of internet services across the country. There are still some parts of the country that have 2G and 3G where the quality of data services is weak. But we know that the telco companies are actually expanding their footprints across the country. And as they expand and provide efficient data service across the country, you're going to see more adoption of e-commerce platforms as a medium of executing trade in the country.
Right. I think we've got about a minute or so left. I mean, we hear of, the big players, Amazon internationally, in America and around the world, Alibaba in China and so on. I mean, who are the biggest players in Nigeria's e-commerce market? And we've got about 40 seconds, so do keep it brief.
Okay, the two major players in the country today are Jumia and Udada. I think there's also a new one that came up recently, but you have three major players, with Jumia obviously in the market space. And then I did mention Udada. And but we still have other small-time players who are actually coming up very fast. And as long as the market keeps expanding, you're going to see new entrants that could actually become quite big.
Okay, please stay with us. Would jolly well like to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the spot of good news for the Nigerian economy as the country heads towards independence celebrations on Friday. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyugolu, and today we're talking about what appears to be Nigeria's growing continent-beating approach to e-commerce. While many countries around the continent are becoming more cutting-edge in this sector, the big future of e-commerce is being staked out in Nigeria. Its market is, of course, far bigger than any other in Africa, but it's also apparently more creative, with tech firms blending e-commerce with social media to become Africa's online shopping giant with millions of actual and potential digital customers. But for this to work properly and efficiently, Nigeria also needs to be at the frontier of regulation so that the rest of the continent can look towards West Africa and Nigeria as the next big thing in the world of e-commerce. With me on the line from Lagos, I believe, is the Managing Director of Cowrie Asset Management, Johnny Chukwu. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. So, I mean, e-commerce in Nigeria, is that something to celebrate as Independence Day approaches amid all the gloom?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the bright spots we have in the country today. And just to re-emphasize how important that sector has grown, if you look at the Nigerian economy today, ICT accounts for the second largest contribution to the GDP of the country. ICT in the second quarter of this year accounted for about 17.9% of the GDP. And this ought to have to do with the fact that the rate at which we have embraced that sector. As it stands today, while even despite the challenges, because one of the things we have done is that the other sector has been able to sidestep some of the challenges or the bottlenecks we have in the country. And it's also supporting the growth of ancillary services. We did talk about the logistics business, which is being propelled by the growth in e-commerce. So as it stands today, it's one of our bright spots. It's one of the areas Nigeria should continue to drive. And it's one of the areas we are currently leading the African continent. And we still have huge untapped potentials as it relates to e-commerce. And one of the things I think we must cherish about the e-commerce that it has been able to even use the challenges we have as a country as springboard for its growth. I talked about our weak road network has become a springboard for a lot of Nigerians to embrace e-commerce, and which has supported the logistics business. And similarly, you have a lot of other challenges. The concerns about carrying cash around, fear of armed robbery has made people to actually convert their funds into e-wallet platforms, or are now prefer to use cards as their means of payment. Then, as it relates to the bottleneck, as it relates to some of the concerns, we have dwelt a lot on that. The key thing for me is that the government must continue to strengthen our regulatory environment, particularly to enforce cybercrime regulations. Today, if you look at the newest piece of legislation as it relates to businesses, Companies Act, Companies and Other Matters Act of 2020, you observe that the law now has made a lot of provisions that encourage electronic trade in the country. And today you can send electronic signatures. Electronic communications can now be presented in court as evidence of to prosecute the case of evidence in the court, unlike what we had before. So even the trade that takes place between two parties in a B2B or B2C businesses, and if there's a dispute, the communications can now be used as a basis to try those cases or to seek for justice in courts. Because the good thing that our legislature has also caught up with the innovations that have been brought about by e-commerce, and have amended our laws to ensure that we have a control over the transactions that take place in the e-commerce space.
Right, let's move away just a little bit from e-commerce and talk a little bit about what you do. I mean, tell us about your company, Cowrie Asset Management. So what does it actually do?
Well, Cowrie Asset is basically an investment banking firm. We are involved in raising long-term equity and debt capital for corporate organizations. We help people like you, Charles, to manage their wealth. So we help direct you to where to invest that will secure your investment as well as give you reasonable returns. We're a very conservative entity, so we believe in creating wealth the old school way, and that's why we took the name Cowrie. So in effect, we know that the life race is not a sprint, it's a long distance journey. So we take it one at a time. We are quite innovative. We are eager to embrace technology. We provide fund management advisory services. We also raise funds, like mutual funds. We manage mutual funds. Beyond that, we also securities trader. So we trade in the capital market, Nigerian NGS, which is Nigerian Exchange. We trade in FMDQ. We trade in NASD. So we help customers execute their financial assets and investment trade.
Right, okay. Well, thanks for telling us about that. I'll have to go and pull out my few pennies and have a chat with you later on. But I mean, yes. Your company presumably then has some focus on investment in Nigeria coming from abroad. I mean, you keep an eye across, foreign direct investment and that sort of thing. How crucial is it for this country to gain the confidence of investors? And how far down the road do you think Nigeria is in that direction?
Well, I think the first thing is that we need to look at those things that incentivize or encourage, attract foreign investors into an economy. And we also look at those things that discourage them. One of the things that encourages foreign investors is, one, if there is liquidity in your FS market, so they can bring their money and take it out. Two, if the returns in that environment are attractive. Today, we have good returns in the Nigerian environment, but we have to deal with the FX challenges. So beyond that, they want a politically stable environment. They want an economy. They're looking for an economy that is growing, but you still have to deal with investors who are, despite all the risk, are ready to come in. Because Nigeria still bodes strong growth opportunities for any investor, despite the challenges we've had in the past couple of years. It's still an economy that will give you some of the highest return if you invest wisely and in a safe way. Beyond that, we have a huge consumer market. Granted, the purchasing power of the average Nigerian has weakened, but with a country with the population of 200 million people, and I always tell my foreign investors group, if you invest in Nigeria and your target is to supply your service, to provide your services, always that to sell your service to just 10% of Nigerians, you're talking about 20 million citizens. That is about half the population of the entire France. That's about 25% of the population of Germany. Assuming you're just selling to 10% of the Nigerian population. If you are in the consumer goods business and you have a product that is consumed by 1% of Nigerians every month, you are selling 2 million units of your product every month. Assuming your margin is just 10 naira. So 2 million times 10 naira will give you 20 million. Okay? So you can understand why the Nigerian market is such a huge market. And that's why the e-commerce is actually booming here. Because I looked at the figures, more than 155 billion was traded in 2019. And we've seen exponential growth beyond that. You talked about the figure for last year. So it's a market that investors really can afford to ignore, in as much as sometimes they will stay on the sideline because they are concerned about one or two issues. But I believe this economy will still be the leading economy in Africa. We are still the biggest economy in Africa.
Right, okay. I want to thank you, Johnson Chukwu, very much indeed for your analysis today. Very, very enlightening. And Johnson Chukwu is the Managing Director of Cowrie Asset Management. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja and Lagos. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.